Murder, she wrote, or he wrote, and I read murder. I don't even like saying that word. Murder. My name's Mischke. I was talking to a fella this week, and this old murder popped into my head from years ago, from back in the early 60s. Horrible, terrible murder. I'm going to talk about that murder today on the show. If you don't want to hear someone talk about murder, I'd turn this off right now and go look at blue jays and hummingbirds. Okay, I was visiting with a fella this week, a fella named Don Johnson. No, I wasn't in Miami, and he's not a cop. Wait, he did work for almost 30 years for the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office. That's a fact. I was chatting with him, 91-year-old guy, sitting in his kitchen talking to him about his years with the Sheriff's Department. Guy is sharp as a tack, remembers everything. So I was chatting with this Don Johnson fella, and he talks about visiting between the bars with these notorious characters involved in this god-awful murder from the 1960s. Maybe the most notorious murder in the state of Minnesota in the 1960s. He's telling me about talking to Norman Maestrian. That ring a bell at all? Dick Anderson. That name ring a bell at all? You'd have to be older. How about T. Eugene Thompson? All three of those guys were involved in murdering T. Eugene Thompson's wife, Carol, in her home in the city of St. Paul, lovely little quiet neighborhood in Highland Park, where nothing bad ever happened, ever. T. Eugene Thompson, big-time attorney in the city of St. Paul, hires a guy to kill his wife. 'Cause T. Eugene Thompson had his eye on a younger woman. T. Eugene Thompson hires Norman Maestrian. Norman Maestrian subcontracts the job to some Dick Anderson. That's how we got on this subject, me and Don Johnson. He's a Korean War vet. So was the guy who killed Carol Thompson. Dick Anderson was a alcoholic Korean War vet who needed a hell of a lot of hooch in his system to even go kill her. Anyway, what happened was I was talking to Don Johnson, and I thought, I'm going to pass along to these people in this new podcast I'm doing for Hubbard Broadcasting. I'm going to pass along an interview that I did a while ago with the author of a book called Dial M, The Carol Thompson Murder. Lovely woman, Carol Thompson. Lovely mother, beautiful soul. Her end, no one should ever have to know. Anyway, I did a show a while back on this murder that happened in this quiet community in St. Paul, Minnesota in the early 60s. A murder that made news not only in the state of Minnesota, it was in the New York Times. It was in the International Herald Tribune. It made news overseas. After Carol Thompson's husband and her 4 kids left the house the morning of March 6th, 1963, she went upstairs to her bedroom, turned on the radio, and sat up in bed to read a magazine, a little respite after the morning hustle and bustle. At the same time, a man she had never met, did not know, never heard of, began to walk up the stairs from her basement. First to the main floor, then to the second floor. This man, this stranger, walked into the bedroom and startled her. He was holding a gun. This man told Carol Thompson he was just there to rob the place, and that she should turn over on her stomach and not look at him. She did as she was told. When she was on her stomach, he took a thick stretch of rubber hose and he violently struck her on the base of her skull, knocking her out. He removed her nightie and picked her up. He took her down the hallway to the bathroom to drown her in the bathtub. He put her in a tub of water and began chest compressions in hopes of forcing the water to move quickly into her airway and into her lungs. But as that water entered her body, Carol Thompson came to, and she fought. The man was wearing surgical gloves, and they were slippery, and he lost his grip repeatedly. She got up. She fought. She pulled away from him. She ran down the hallway. Now, some people might have raced right down the stairs and run right out the door, but Carol Thompson was a modest Midwestern woman who was not going to run outside naked. She went back into her bedroom to put on her bathrobe. This allowed the man to catch up with her. His plan now was to just kill her with his gun. So he pulled it out, aimed it at her, and fired. But the gun jammed. Carol Thompson used that opportunity to run past him. He hit her with the butt of the gun as she did, and she fell, but she got up again and she ran for the stairs with the man following. At the bottom of the stairs, she went for the front door, but the chain was latched. And when she pulled the door open, it stopped abruptly after just a few inches. She screamed. The man came up to her, hitting her over and over again with the butt of his gun so violently that pieces of the handle began to break off. She collapsed on the floor. He decided since his gun was malfunctioning, he would finish her off with a knife. So he went to the kitchen. He grabbed a paring knife. He came back out and he began stabbing Carol Thompson. The man eventually stuck the knife in her throat and broke off the handle. Carol seemed to be unconscious, maybe even dead. Convinced he had finished her off, the man headed upstairs to clean himself up. He was covered in blood. But upstairs in the bathroom, standing at the sink, he heard a door open and close on the main floor. He could not believe it. He simply could not believe it. He raced downstairs, and Carol Thompson was gone. On that snowy morning, she was running in her bloody bathrobe to the house next door, pounding on the door. No one home. She went to the next house, pounded on the door. No one home. So she went to the corner house, and there Mrs. Nelson answered. But she did not recognize her neighbor, whom she knew well. Carol Thompson was a bloody mess, and she collapsed on the floor at the door of the Nelson home. Carol Thompson was rushed to a St. Paul hospital. Doctors tried mightily to save her, but she died. I did a podcast on this murder years ago that I want you to hear. It's an extraordinary story with strange twists, a dark, bizarre story. So I'll deliver it to you as I delivered it in that podcast years ago, right after this break. Hey, you. Yes, you. The one whose car makes weird noises, whose engine thinks it's auditioning for some heavy metal band, or whose vehicle just doesn't seem to get you anymore. Fury Motors and Fury Ford of Waconia are here to save your beautiful time on the road for you. This isn't your boring, yawn-inducing car dealership. This is Fury. Think about that name for a moment, Fury. They'll treat you like family because it's been a family business and their customers are multi-generational. It won't be your typical car buying experience. You'll laugh while you're there. You'll enjoy yourself. Stop driving that sad thing you're in and come to Fury, where your next car is a legend on wheels, just waiting for you. Fury Chrysler, Jeep, and Dodge of South St. Paul and Stillwater. Fury Ford in Waconia. At their lots, they have every car imaginable. You'll find something for you. Hey, you. Yeah, you. No, not those. No. You. You with the money and the dreams and that weird obsession with not losing your shirt. Josh Arnold is here for you. 40 years of experience is here for you. That's 40 summers, 40 winters, 40 years of wrestling the wild world of investments, wrestling them into submission. Josh Arnold is offering you a 48-minute free consultation. 48 minutes free, okay? That's longer than most sitcoms, and far shorter than your weird cousin's TED Talk, I'll tell you that. What was he thinking? So, if you want your money to do something other than nap in a boring account, you call Josh Arnold. He's the investment wizard. 952-925-5608. That's 952-925-5608. I had a chance to interview William Swanson years ago, the writer who authored the book Dial M, The Murder of Carol Thompson. And I want to deliver the show I did with Bill. It was a vicious, brutal murder by any measure in any city in America, any city in the world. But on Hillcrest Avenue in St. Paul in 1963, this horrific crime had literally been unimaginable, incomprehensible. Most would have said impossible. And the reverberations would rock the town like no crime had before. Frightened families would begin locking all their doors. Children would be kept inside. Women who stayed at home during the day would be filled with anxiety. There was a homicidal maniac on the loose. When Carol Thompson was rushed to the hospital, her husband, T. Eugene Thompson, received a call at work and raced from his downtown St. Paul office. But not to the hospital, where his wife was fighting for her life. No, he raced home to 1720 Hillcrest, where the police were milling about. This would be the first example of incriminating behavior, but hardly the last for the prominent St. Paul attorney. Yes, it was T. Eugene, otherwise known as Cotton Thompson due to his white blonde hair, who had arranged for his wife's murder. Cotton Thompson had left for work that day knowing the stranger was waiting in the basement. Cotton Thompson had left for work that day making sure the front door chain was latched, something the family never did. T. Eugene Thompson had even filled the bathtub with a fair amount of water to help out the killer in his attempt to drown Carol. And Cotton Thompson raced home before going to the hospital because clearly something had gone terribly wrong with the plan. The plan for the murder was for it to look like an accident, like Carol had slipped in the bathtub, hit her head, and drowned. That's what her husband had paid for, but that's not what he got. It is terribly difficult to fathom this, but Cotton Thompson had planned for his youngest daughter, 6 years old, to come home from school first, as she always did, and discover her mother dead in the bathtub. He was okay with that. That was, in fact, his hope. So he raced home to see just how bungled this murder had been before racing to the hospital. There is a haunting book about this murder and its aftermath, written by a Twin Cities writer named William Swanson. The book is titled Dial M, The Murder of Carol Thompson. I drove over to Bill Swanson's house in Minneapolis to talk to him about the most disturbing murder case I've ever heard about in the entire state of Minnesota. Disturbing on so many levels, as you will come to see.
The immediate family gathers at an aunt's house in the neighborhood. This is a pretty close-knit neighborhood and close-knit family. Carol's parents, she was an only child, Carol's parents lived just a couple blocks away, and there was this aunt's house not much farther. So that's where everybody gathered, and friends and more distant relatives. They were coming from all over. The four kids, ages 13 through 6 at the time, were all gathered from their respective schools. Jeff, the oldest, was at SPA. He had been pulled out of choir by the pastor from Edgecombe Presbyterian who had come to get him. The 3 girls were all in public schools in Highland Park. So they were all gathered. And there it was just this surreal scene where the adults had a television on, and one of the little girls remembers seeing this black and white picture of a woman being wheeled on a cart through a hospital quickly. It was her mom. It was her mom being rushed into emergency surgery. So there's a TV going on. There's the adults kind of shell-shocked, whispering and talking among themselves, trying to keep the kids removed from what was happening, but that was pretty difficult. There were police detectives who arrived too, right there at the time that afternoon. And they asked if they could speak to the children. There were 2 detectives from the St. Paul Police Department. And T. Eugene, and I'm just going to call him Cotton from now on, just to make it easy, because that's what everyone called him at the time. He had this kind of white blonde crew cut, so everyone knew him as Cotton. Cotton took the kids one by one into a bedroom with the detectives. And the detectives asked, "Did you see anybody when you left for school? Did you hear anything?" Jeff was, at 13, he was the oldest and a little bit more worldly wise, but still just a kid. He was a loner, kind of pudgy and unpopular at SPA, smart, but very much an underachiever. And so much so that his parents were frustrated. They've got him in this expensive school, and he doesn't seem to be pulling his weight. And all he seemed to care about was his huge stash of comic books. He had this little attic in their house on Hillcrest, and he would go up there when he'd come home from school with a glass of milk and a donut. He would sit there and go through his comic books. And from the sounds of it, he had hundreds of them. So his parents were very frustrated, and they thought, we got to get his head out of these comic books. So the day before she was murdered, Carol went upstairs while he was still at school, collected this cache of comics, took it downstairs, and burned them all in the alley. So he comes home from school, and he runs upstairs, as he always did, with his glass of milk and his brownie or whatever he was having for a treat. And, oh my God, his comic, where are they? So he goes rushing downstairs. "Mom, where are my comics?" I mean, you can just imagine this. This is like a bad TV show, right? "Where are my comics?" And she said, "Well, Jeffrey, we're concerned about your grades, and your father and I decided that we should destroy your comic books so you can concentrate on your grades." He just freaked out. He loved his mother, but he never said another word to her. He left for school the next morning, and he left the house without saying another word to his mother. It's just one of those spooky things that I think has haunted him for a long time. Just one of those really heartbreaking details about this story. Makes me sad to think about it. The kids continued to live in the house. In fact, they went back into the house the next day and went back to their normal school routine. They went back to their house with T. Eugene, and the maternal grandparents, as I say, were nearby, and they spent a lot of time over there. And the maternal grandparents would come to 1720 Hillcrest, too. Their grandparents, the Swobodas, were very, very, we call it tough love now. That's not what they called it then, but they were very adamant about keeping things normal.
Normal. Nothing would ever be normal again. Not for these kids. The police would uncover the plot. The whole thing would unravel. Cotton Thompson had simply made too many obvious moves that pointed the finger in his direction. He had taken out life insurance policies on his wife to the tune of over $1 million. He had gotten rid of the family dog beforehand, who tended to bark a lot at strangers. He had removed the phone from the bedroom. He was a well-known womanizer in town who'd been seen with other women on his arm. T. Eugene Thompson had hired a former client of his to murder his wife, Norman Maestrian. But while Maestrian was certainly capable of murder and had probably killed before, he would have been far more up for killing a local ruffian rather than an innocent mother of 4, so he subcontracted the kill. And it wasn't easy finding people who wanted to kill an innocent mother of 4. He'd ask, and people would turn him down once they learned of the target. Until he got to Dick W.C. Anderson, a traumatized Korean War vet with a Purple Heart and a drug and alcohol problem. Anderson needed those drugs and that alcohol in order to get himself up for such a crime, and he was on both of them that morning in March. But he was no professional killer, and he would have trouble sleeping after that day, and his eventual confession would be a relief to him, and it would do in Norman Maestrian and Cotton Thompson. At the Wellshire Residential Memory Care Center in Medina and Bloomington, every day is actually an opportunity for joy. Life at the Wellshire is not depressing. Far from it. You hear laughter. You see gardens. You watch people at an ice cream parlor. You see people watching movies. You see people sitting around talking, joking. There are 4 households at the Wellshire designed to support residents at every stage of memory care. So everyone gets the right care in the right way. The staff meets the residents right where they're at. They're trained for these 4 stages. Residents can go to a salon, a barber shop, wander through sunlit courtyards, or just share a laugh. It's a lively place. At the Wellshire, care is serious, but life is light, and it's active, and it's warm, and it's welcoming, and it's full of little joys like live music. There are musicians on staff playing music for the residents. You should feel the energy there. You should tour the Wellshire. You know what is weird about most banks? They treat you kind of like a barcode. I feel like a human barcode, or worse, like I'm lucky they even want to hold my money for me. Let me tell you something. At North American Banking Company, they do things differently with a capital D. They have 6 locations in the Twin Cities, so there's one convenient for you. But at North American Banking Company, they're not trying to be big. They're trying to be human. You walk in, someone knows your name. Someone gets your story. Someone actually listens. Loans, business accounts, you have questions, they have answers, and they talk like a real person. Talk like they were talking to their brother or their aunt. At North American Banking Company, banking isn't a chore. It's smart, it's personal, it's honest. It can even be fun. When a bank actually cares, everything just falls into place. Have a human banking experience, and remember those days. That used to be what you found everywhere.
North American Banking Company. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
Norman Maestrian, the middleman in the Thompson murder, had quite probably murdered a man a couple years earlier.
T. Eugene got him off.
T. Eugene got him off. That's how they got together. T. Eugene was a criminal attorney, and he was Maestrian's attorney. The thing about this, Tom, that I think makes it memorable and probably explains why you're sitting here is that this was not a typical or ordinary murder. This woman was the woman next door for white, middle class, middle American, mid-century citizens. This was the prototype. She was smart. She did not graduate from Macalester only because she met and married Cotton Thompson. Incidentally, Norman Maestrian had gone to Macalester about the same time, and so had Walter Mondale. But this would have been late 40s. I don't know what Macalester was like then. Norman Maestrian, I think, was a pretty bright guy. I don't know if I say that Thompson met Maestrian at Macalester. They were there at roughly the same time. Thompson was the kind of guy who walked around BMOC, chest puffed out, and, as a lawyer, he was really obnoxious. He'd wear a bowler, and he would carry a silver-handled cane on occasion and strut around with a attractive woman on his arm, not Carol, by the way. So it's not hard to imagine that a lot of people would have known who Cotton Thompson was, even as an undergrad at Macalester. But anyway, Carol was smart. She aspired to being a housewife and a mother, which she became, of course. But after that, unlike a lot of women at the time, 1963, she decided that she wanted to learn Russian. She had always wanted to speak Russian. I'm not sure why, but that was one of her interests. And wanted to go back to school and become a professional librarian. Again, unusual for somebody at that time. Meantime, she is active in all the things that you expect a busy, involved mother to be active in. School affairs, church affairs, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts. She's active in all of this. When I went through the files of the St. Paul Police Department, the most touching thing I found in there, and there was all kinds of stuff. I mean, there was memos and reports and diagrams and photos and telegrams, all kinds of things. But the one thing I'll never forget is her calendar. Moms all kept a calendar in their kitchen in those days. And there in her little tight handwriting was her schedule for the month of March. It included cooking brownies and picking up Margaret at Girl Scouts. And I mean, just all the things that this mother does. And there it is in her hand. And March 6th was going to be a busy day. She had a couple things to pick up, and there's choir practice and this and that. So,
as a criminal defense attorney, T. Eugene Thompson must have known that when a wife is murdered, police always start with the husband when looking for a suspect. They want to rule him out before ever bothering to look any further. Cotton Thompson never gave them a reason to look elsewhere. And when pieces of the broken gun handle found at the scene were eventually linked to Dick Anderson, and he confessed and fingered his co-conspirators, it was time to arrest the husband who had done such a poor job of covering his tracks. 13-year-old Jeff Thompson went to bed at the family lake cabin that summer, excited for his birthday the following day, only to wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of the police hauling away his father. Just a little over 3 months after losing Mom, Dad was now under arrest for her murder. If there was one reason more than any other for wanting to read Bill Swanson's book, at least for me, it was longing to understand how 4 kids could survive that kind of trauma. If there is any childhood pain that seems insurmountable, it is this.
That was an interesting turnaround, too, because until Cotton was arrested, those kids were minor celebrities. Everybody wanted to have them over for dinner. Everybody wanted to invite them to their birthday parties. They were the most talked about kids in the city of St. Paul, and all of a sudden very popular. And they weren't necessarily all that popular to begin with. I mean, they had friends and all of that, but I don't think they were queen of the hop or anything. And then almost overnight, in fact, it was overnight, the old man is arrested. His picture's in the paper. He's charged with arranging the brutal murder of Mrs. Thompson, and the kids become pariahs. Nobody wants to have them over. The parents of their friends are all saying, keep your distance from these kids. They didn't use the term bad seed, probably, but that's what they're thinking. This neighborhood, this city, I think, was so traumatized. It really was like a bad movie, what's going through their minds about all of this. One of the girls said it was like we had a red M on our foreheads for murderer. They really lost whatever social standing they had in that community. And as I said, at one time, they were very much a part of it. And they became very close, the four of them. And Jeff was always their leader. He was their tormentor. He was a tremendous tease. He still is. He loved to get their goat, but he also was very protective of them. And they will all say that. They were three interesting and very different from one another and different from Jeff individuals. Two of them at different times and to different degrees, best I can tell, believed in spiritualism, which I think they got from Antonia Swoboda, their grandmother. She was a devout Presbyterian and a spiritualist. And two of the girls really got into that, meaning that you talk to people on the other side, people who have passed. At one point, as they were teenagers or young adults, one of the daughters, I think it was Margaret, told Jeff, I'm a medium. And he said, oh, I'm a large. I mean, he has spent a career making fun of his sisters, whom he loves dearly. But they are clearly at odds. He's a nuts and bolts kind of guy, and of course became a lawyer and a prosecutor and a judge and all of those things. And so it was just this little foursome kind of overseen by their grandparents. And then their grandparents, this is important too, hired a series of housekeepers that were basically nannies. So the four kids stayed in that house. Their mother had been brutally murdered right there, and the kids were staying in there for a couple of years. They had one housekeeper in particular, Mrs. G, they called her, Ada Grassinger, who became like a second mother to them. And in some ways, I think little Amy found her even warmer than her mother had been. And then one night, she had an embolism and she dies in her bed with these little kids living there. All of a sudden, there's ambulance people running into the house to pull Mrs. G out of there. It's just, this is, Dickens might have written part of this. I haven't seen the girls, I call them still, for a few years. They're all middle-aged people. Jeff is a very complicated, very intelligent, very accomplished guy, highly respected in legal circles and very funny, has a very mordant sense of humor. If you sat down and had dinner with him, which I do every once in a while, you'll have a great time. But I have seen him early on. I mean, I started researching this story in the late 90s. This was originally a story in Minneapolis St. Paul magazine that I used as kind of the springboard to the book. Jeff was angry. His third marriage was falling apart. He had two young boys by that marriage. And he was a troubled guy. He was he was then a judge or becoming a judge in Winona County. So I'd go down there and spend some time with him. And I remember one time we went out for dinner, and he said, I'm going to get married again. And I said, really? And I had met this woman, this Diane Madsen. And he says, what do you think about that? What could I say? I said, well, four is a charm, And as it turned out, it has been. They're still married. This was, so it's, but he's had serious issues thinking about this. I wouldn't say he's troubled, but he's carried this weight a long time. And he's kind of infamous in being the son of an infamous murderer. Plus, he looked just like his dad. he looks like his dad. And like his dad, he changed his hairstyle and sometimes grew a beard, but the same body type and same coloring and all of that. Glasses, very, poor eyes, very much like his dad physically. And Jeff is a great schmoozer, as was the old man. And Jeff is aware of all that. And I'll kid him about that sometimes.
Did all three of the girls grow up to marry and have children?
The first two did, with a couple of divorces in there in each case. Amy, the youngest, who they always called the wild child, she had a very close relationship at one time when she worked in a motel, when she was a clerk in a motel, with a guy from Louisiana. Sounds kind of like a slick guy from Louisiana, an older guy who had been in trouble, etc. You can kind of see the pattern here. I don't recall that she married him, but they were together for a long time. And then he died prematurely. He had a stroke and died. And, people made the connection between T. Eugene and this fellow because he had been kind of a rogue. And they probably would have been discouraged from seeking the kind of counseling that we kind of take for granted now. Antonia Swoboda would have said, no, you just straighten yourself out. We're just going to tough through this. That was her approach to the world.
And what did toughing it out mean? Well, part of it meant figuring out where you were going to land when it came to your dad. Throughout the trial, T. Eugene Thompson maintained his innocence. The jury would take just 12 hours to convict him, but he would say they were wrong. He would be sentenced to life at Stillwater Prison and would maintain his innocence throughout his years there. He expected his kids to believe him, and in the beginning they all did. They were children who could not imagine their father paying cash to kill their beautiful mother and upend their lives. No kid would want to believe that. But as they became adults, those views changed. They began to see the crime more objectively. They began to see what the jury saw, and the prosecutors, and most of St. Paul. That meant toughing it out would get a little trickier. What would their relationship be with their father if they now thought he actually did it? Would they have any relationship? And here's where Bill Swanson's book gets truly fascinating. To different degrees, they did have a relationship. To varying degrees, he was still dad to all four of them. Yet never did T. Eugene Thompson admit his role. He went to his grave at the age of 88, swearing he had nothing to do with this. It must have been a guy connected to the mob who he had perhaps had as a client. Or it was a botched robbery where they weren't expecting to find Carol at home. The kids knew better, all of them. And yet he was also their father. And you only have the one.
The girls especially, but Jeff too, right to the end. By the end, I mean T. Eugene's death. They had a very ambiguous relationship with him, with the old man. And I think depending on when you talk to them, they might tell you different things about T. Eugene. They eventually all came to agree with Jeff, who was adamant about this, that the old man was in fact guilty as charged, that he had planned and bankrolled this murder for the worst reasons. Insurance money, $1.1 million in life insurance, and for apparently life with another woman that he had been sleeping with.
So how long do the kids go convinced their father was wrongfully convicted?
For some length, especially the two older girls. You know, these kids, even young adults, they're changing their minds too as they hear something new and, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Or I think that they were in many respects, they became very defensive because all of a sudden T. Eugene was the evilest man in St. Paul. He was the epitome of the murderous husband and bad father, all of those things. And I think they got their backs up at some point. They would say to themselves or to each other, you know, we had a lot of fun with him. He could be really, really sweet. And Margaret, even after he was paroled in 1983, she would go to him with financial questions. Should I sell this house or not? What do you think about that, putting it on the market? You know, just practical questions that grown kids are always going to their fathers for, or their mothers. They're wise. They've been around the block. They know these things.
Visited him in prison all the years he was there?
Very little. Jeff used to go fairly regularly. I think the girls were spooked by going to the prison. Remember how young they are now. And then they're teenagers.
Do the parents of Carol Thompson turn on Cotton quickly or gradually in their mind?
Quickly, very quickly. They supported him through the trial. He was described to me by people who knew them as the son they never had. Carol was an only child. They never had a son. Well, Cotton was their son. And they stuck with him and testified on his behalf at his trial. The minute that verdict came down, Tony cut his picture, literally sliced his picture out of all the family photos they had, and would not allow the kids to even mention his name. So not only was he a bad man, he was a non-existent. He didn't exist anymore. We're not talking about your father. And maybe she didn't say he doesn't exist, but we're not talking about your mother's death. We're not talking about your father.
Hey, you, sweating in the summer, freezing in the winter, watching your pipes stage a little rebellion in your plumbing system in your house. MSP, Minneapolis-St. Paul Plumbing, Heating, and Air, has been around for a while. You know what a while is? You ready for this? Here's how long MSP has been around. Oh, boy. They've been around since World War I. That's one, not two. That's 1918, camper. 1918. Before you went and picked someone up at the airport. Before radios. Before your great-grandma ever thought about central air. At MSP, Minneapolis-St. Paul Plumbing, Heating, and Air, they have survived flappers, prohibition, even disco. And they remain at the summit of the mountain when it comes to plumbing, heating, and air conditioning. When you're at it that long, you figure some things out, huh? They're smarter than Google. They're more skilled than MacGyver. They are the masters. Keep your home comfortable year-round. Go with MSP. Unless you don't want experience that goes back to 1918. You want a rookie? Okay, good luck to you. I bet he's cheap. This year at the Minnesota State Fair, Spectacle Shop is moving from the second floor of the grandstand to the first floor. They're going to offer their $59 frame sale on the first floor of the grandstand now. These are the incredible frames, normally $250 to $800, that they're selling for just $59 if you buy prescription lenses. Bring your prescription to the fair if you want to. You don't want to miss this opportunity because we're talking about Spectacle Shop, the place voted best eyewear shop in Minnesota the last 5 years in a row by readers of the Star Tribune. They're the ones having this incredible $59 frame sale. Your chance to get premium, stylish frames, designer frames at a price that is actually unheard of. Spectacle Shop has had frames no other optical store has had for years and years and years. They always offer frames you can't find anywhere else. And now imagine a $59 frame sale. All 12 days of the Minnesota State Fair, first floor of the grandstand.
He would show up or be invited to graduation parties and weddings and anniversaries and all of this stuff. My wife and I were invited to one of the girls, one of their kids' high school graduation parties. And there's T. Eugene. And he's schmoozing, he's talking, and he's just, there he is. And I think when he's there, Margaret or Patty, I don't remember whose party it was, must have just told herself, well, we're just not making issues here. We're going to get through this. We've got other things to worry about. Life has got to go on. I went to another party. This was at Jeff's house in Winona, Jeff and Diane's house. It was a birthday party for Jeff, maybe his 60th. And there's this big crowd of friends and people from the courthouse and family members and so forth from all over. And there's T. Eugene again. And when I walked in, honest to God, he's sitting on a sofa in the living room, and right above his head is a portrait of Carol Thompson. And the grotesque, macabre irony of that. Jeff. When I was researching the book, as I say, I spent a lot of time with him. And one afternoon, very typically, we sat there for hours. I think he was in Faribault at the time. He was Rice County attorney. And he got off on this tear about his old man. And just, for 2 hours, just described him the most despicable terms and just terrible terms. And then we went out for dinner or a drink or something afterward. And he says, I got to get to the drugstore before it closes. I said, why is that? And he said, I got to buy a birthday card for my dad. And I said, Jeff, you just spent 2 hours running him down in the most vivid terms. And now you're going to go make sure you get a birthday card for him. I mean, what's up with that? And he sat there, he took a deep breath, and he sat there for a minute, and all of a sudden his eyes filled with tears. And he says, he's my dad. The old man comes to the door and expects to be invited in. And more often than not, they invited him in. And I said, Margaret, I just don't understand that. How does that work? And she said, well, at some point, you just want it to be easier. This very difficult situation. I've got little kids standing there. Oh, it's Grandpa. Are you going to tell this 4-year-old? Well, yeah, it's Grandpa, but he's also a brutal murderer. At some point, you just want this awful churning to kind of smooth out. At no point in the book do we talk about forgiveness. He never asked for forgiveness because that would have required him to confess. And the kids couldn't forgive him and didn't forgive him. They might accept him as their father through thick and thin after all that's happened. He's still my dad, as Jeff said. But at no time did they forgive him.
There is one scene toward the end of William Swanson's book, Dial M, the story of the Carol Thompson murder. There's one scene that stands out to me in a way no other scene does. And that's a scene in one of the siblings' homes 3 years after their father had been paroled. It's 1986, and there's a formal family gathering on a cold January evening. The gathering is kind of a kitchen court. T. Eugene Thompson's kids would come to call it a trial, a retrial, one might say. Family court, with son Jeff as the prosecutor, with T. Eugene as both defendant and defense attorney, and the sisters taking on the role of the jury. It really happened, and it was Jeff's idea, arranged partially to formally convince the two sisters once and for all that they should never again entertain even a passing notion that their father could possibly be innocent. Jeff had been the only one of the four to go over the 2,400-page trial transcript, and it had had a powerful effect on him, convincing him beyond any doubt that his dad was guilty. That winter night, Jeff was well armed with evidence, and the evidence was overwhelming. T. Eugene Thompson, he was not so well armed. He pulled from his briefcase a single document from the Norman Maestrian trial, where Maestrian's defense produced weak evidence of possible third-party blood supposedly found at the scene. T. Eugene Thompson thought this exonerated him. Jeff told all gathered there that it didn't change a single thing. Not surprisingly, in that kitchen court, T. Eugene Thompson was convicted yet again. But much like over 20 years earlier, he walked out into that winter air still claiming he was innocent. You see, he had kept the lie going far too long. He had told it too many times. He was a proud, even arrogant man, and coming clean now for him was simply impossible. The vulnerability required wasn't in the guy, nor was the empathy he would need to have for his adult children. It is a staggeringly powerful testament to family ties that the evening would still not end the siblings' relationship with their dad. Jeff had been sure it would. He had said at the end of that night that the siblings' relationship with their father was over. But that would not stick. In the end, Jeff and his sisters would come to embrace a more nuanced view. The idea that the act of murder could never be separated from the man, but that it wasn't all there was to the man. Human beings, Jeff would come to say, are more complex than that. The obituary the family would ultimately write following the death of T. Eugene Thompson would end by stating that he was multifaceted, and it would quote Oscar Wilde, who said, "Every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future." Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll talk to you again next time.